Yep. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Strategic Planning Committee. Today's date is 16th of June. Time is 2 o'clock. Item 1, apologies for absence and notification of substitute members. Can I ask Democratic Services Officer whether any apologies for absence have been received, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've apologies received from Councillor Charles Manners and Councillor Anthony Locke, with Councillor Stephen Clark and Councillor Adrian Cartwright substituting respectively.
Thank you. Item 2, declaration of interest. Do any members of the committee have any declarations of interest in any of the items under consideration at this meeting? Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I'm speaking on behalf of Grange Park Parish Council, objecting to the planning application.
Thank you. Anyone else? Item 3, minutes. Do we confirm the minutes of the meetings for Strategic Planning Committee held on 21st of April 2026 and 12th of May 2026 as the correct records? Committee. Yes. Thank you. Item 4, Chair's announcements. I'd like to welcome the new municipal year for strategic planning. Full council was held on 21st of May. Allocations were made to respective committees. The changes for strategic planning. Councillor Locke nominated as Vice Chair. Councillor Jonathan Harris is also appointed to the committee. There have been an addition of new substitutes, whereas Councillors Laura Weston, Adrian Little, Deborah King and Rupert Frost. So welcome everybody. With regards to agenda item number 6, lands northeast of Brackley, please be advised that WNC planning team in consultation with legal have made the decision to withdraw this item from the meeting, and it will be referred back to Strategic Planning Committee at a future date. As a reminder to the committee that an additional meeting has been added to the calendar and will be held in Towcester on 30th of June 2026. Committee members are advised that a new schedule of planning training has now been agreed, and the next mandatory planning session will be held on Wednesday, 15th of July, between 6 and 9 p.m. On to our regular announcements. Members of the public are permitted to film, broadcast and report on the meeting, subject to efficient running of the meeting not being affected. Only those people who have registered in line with the committee's speaking procedure may address the committee. Members of the public are requested not to call out during the committee's discussions on any item. Anybody who repeatedly disrupts the meeting may be asked to leave. All speakers will have 5 minutes in which to make their statement and are asked to remain seated after they've addressed the committee to answer any questions the committee may have. This meeting is being webcast on the Council's corporate YouTube channel. Therefore, when speaking, please speak clearly and concisely into your microphone at all times. There are no plans for fire drills, so if the alarm does sound, evacuation instructions will be given by Democratic Services. Please ensure that any device is switched off or onto silent modes. And for the benefit of the public watching remotely, we'll now introduce everyone, starting to my furthest right, please.
Good afternoon, Chair. My name's Sian Webb. I'm the Principal Planning and Highways Lawyer. Thank you.
Diana Davis, Democratic Services.
Councillor Scott Packer, Chair.
Simon Ellis, Head of Development Management.
Nikki Scaife, Major Projects Team Leader.
Daniel Callis, Major Projects Officer and the Case Officer for the first item.
Phil Donaldson, Highways Development Management Engineer.
Steve Bibb, Consultant from Pell Frishman. We support West Northamptonshire Council's Highway Development Management Team.
Sorry, Councillor Jonathan Harris, board member for Brixworth, and it's actually technically a welcome back because I've been here before. Thanks.
Councillor Sally Keeble-Darlington, Spencer Ward.
Councillor Bob Purser, Abington and Phipsville.
Councillor Stephen Clark, Cooknow and the Houghtons.
Councillor David Smith.
Councillor Phil Bignell, Campion.
Councillor Ron Furman, Hunsbury Ward.
Councillor Adrian Cartwright, Headlands.
Councillor Trevor Hughes, Nen Valley.
Councillor Richard Pipes, Daventry Northwest.
Councillor Dave Gaskell, Kingsthorpe South.
Councillor Nigel Barrow, Kingsthorpe North.
Thank you, everyone. Agenda item number 5, 2023/5978/EIA, land south and east of Grange Park, Northampton. I'll now hand over to Case Officer Dan Callis. Councillor Bignell, would you like to say something?
I would, Chair. I'm confused by a councillor's declaration of interest. He says he's speaking on behalf of a parish council, yet he's taking part in the debate as himself.
He won't be taking part. Councillor is going to recluse himself now and move off.
Oh, sorry, he didn't make that clear when he made his declaration. Thank you.
I'll now hand over to the Case Officer, Dan Callis, to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that, Chair. Thank you. So item 5 is an application for major residential development on land south and east of Grange Park. The application seeks outline planning permission for up to 850 dwellings, including 45% affordable. The scheme also includes a new local centre, land for a new 2-form-entry primary school, open space, including an extension of the adjacent country park, community allotments, landscape buffers, enhanced off-site pedestrian and cycle links, and associated off-site highway works. All matters are reserved except for access. The site lies between Grange Park and the village of Quinton. The site lies outside the existing confines of both settlements and therefore is currently in the open countryside. The site comprises 43.6 hectares of arable agricultural land comprising 3 fields. It fronts onto Wootton Road to the east, which runs down here, and Washbrook Lane to the south. It also abuts Foxfields Country Park, which is in this area here, and the M1 to the southwest. There's a substantial mature tree belt running generally north-south through the site, and that's in this position, as well as a watercourse that bisects the site and then runs up part of the western boundary. So that's basically running north-south up here. A bridleway runs if I can say it correctly, north-south through the site adjacent to the tree belt. So that comes down through the country park and then down the western side here. The southwestern part of the site is generally fairly flat, whereas the northeastern segment falls gently from east to west from the Wootton Road down to the brook. Just take you through some photos of the site. So this is in the southeastern corner looking west. So this is, you have the brook obviously in the bottom of the valley, a relatively small valley. You have private residential property known as the Risings on the left-hand side. And then the tree area that you can see is the southern corner of Foxfield Country Park. And on the ridge line in front, you can see the tree belt that bisects the site. This is a view from sort of looking back towards where the previous photo was. So brook in the foreground And then we have the rear of Glebe Farm here, and the Wootton Road is on the ridge line running off to the left-hand side. And then this is a view of the boundary towards the risings. So the brook is just sort of within the vegetation line there. That's looking north from Washbrook Lane, or approximately. A view from the southern part of the site looking south, you can just about make out the M1. You can see in the distance there. So the southern boundary of the site is the hedge line, and you can see that the landscape to the south does rise slightly up towards the wind farm that you can just make out on the just in the photograph there. This is within the eastern part of the site looking north. This property here is Foxfield, and you've got Foxfield Country Park being everything on the other side of the hedge, and you can just about make out the pavilion within Foxfield Country Park, I think there, and some of the dwellings in Grange Park. And then again, from same sort of, well, looking back from the north end of that back towards the southern part of the site, and you can just see the topography as it comes down from the Wootton Road towards the brook. And then this with Foxfield again here, looking north, and you can make out the development in Wootton on the skyline in the distance. And then this is a view from within Foxfield Country Park looking towards the site. So the brook is within the vegetation line, and the site is the green field that you can see with the hedge line along the top, along the ridge line there being the Wootton Road. So what we have on the screen now is the indicative master plan. What's proposed is 3 points of vehicular access, so one on the Wootton Road here, and then 2 on Washbrook Lane on the southern side of the site down at the bottom here. In terms of pedestrian access, there is a 3-metre shared footway cycleway which would come out of the site at the north corner and then continue along Wootton Road towards Wootton. It would also connect with public rights of way in this position here that would allow connectivity into Grange Park. There's also the bridleway coming up through Foxfield Country Park, which is established public right of way. And in addition, there's also a footpath link which exits the site at this point along and then crosses an uncontrolled crossing and would connect with the village of Quinton. The indicative master plan shows the approximate locations of designated play spaces, the school, the local centre, allotments and the SUDs. So the school is this blue area, local centre is the slightly sort of pinky salmon, and then the play area here. And then just indicatively, we've got positions of SUDs basins in some of the lower parts of the site around here, and then the allotments up towards the top end. All vegetation within the site would be retained except where required to create the accesses. And yeah, I think that with the vehicular accesses and potentially some of the walking and cycling accesses. This shows you the parameter plan, which shows again, indicatively the arrangement of the different land uses within the site. So looking at the accesses in detail, because these are for full approval at this stage, this is the Wootton Road access. So it involves widening the existing road to create a central ghost island for a right-hand turn into the site. So that involves the removal of some of the existing hedgerow along the site boundary, but there would be replacement planting as part of any landscape scheme. And then moving to Washbrook Lane. So this is the first, or the more I suppose the primary access from Washbrook Lane. Again, it's a right-hand turn, ghost island, T-junction arrangement. In addition, on this one, there's the provision of bus stops within the existing highway that would enable connection with other services that sort of bypass the site, as it were, go along the existing Washbrook Lane, serving Quinton. And then we have the bridleway coming down, and that ends at this point here. So obviously there would need to be provision for equestrian use coming off the road and into the site. And then lastly, the second or eastern access on Washbrook Lane. Again, very similar sort of arrangement. And as we pointed out on the site visit, pre-committee site visit, there were a number of trees on this one and hedgerow that would need to be removed, but there would be replacement planting as part of any reserve matters. In terms of the walking and cycling connection from the site along Wootton Road, this plan shows that north is to the left, essentially, but it connects with the existing 3-metre footway cycleway that comes out of Grange Park at Lark Lane. So it would be a continuation of that. The work would also require the minor slewing of the existing carriageway across in order to create width for this path. There are a number of TPO trees along here, and there are locations where potentially the width of the footway cycleway would need to be reduced slightly, subject to the Section 278 agreement, in order to ensure that there wasn't any undue harm to those protected trees. And then I think this is lastly the Quinton Path connection. Again, so on the pre-committee site visit, this is actually the route that we walked from Quinton into the site, and that's just along there and then turns in between Glebe Cottage and Glebe Farm. And then lastly, sorry, there is the 5.5 metre, carriageway widening of Washbrook Lane between the site and the A508, so essentially to the west of the site, widening that where needed to 5.5 metres. Okay, so now we have on the screen the landscape strategy plan. Some of the proposals in here to point out are the development being set back a minimum of 15 metres off the Wootton Road. Obviously, the allotments would provide more than that at the northern end, but in this location here and also along Washbrook Lane, a similar setback in development with landscape planting. There's also a 10-metre buffer to the watercourse. There's also the buffer to the motorway, and that buffer would, as part of the scheme going forward, include an acoustic fence that would help mitigate any impact from noise from the motorway. And then in this location here, the proposal would be for structural planting that ran along the edge of the spine road, and then the land outside that or to the east of that would be retained as more of an open meadow area. This plan just demonstrates some of the mitigation in relation to the Upper Nen Valley Gravel Pits Special Protection Area, which is to the north. It's about 4 kilometres or so to the north of the site, but Natural England have required some mitigation, and this indicatively demonstrates the sort of mitigation on site that would be provided in terms of informal recreational use, dog walking, etc., that would offset any increased demand for people to visit the special protection area. And this plan just demonstrates some of the approach that could be taken to landscaping within that in order to create that environment for that recreational use. And then lastly, this is just an indicative drainage plan, so very high level at the moment, but just sort of giving an indication as to how the drainage on the site could be delivered in terms of different sort of catchment areas draining into different basins in different locations. Okay, so the proposed development is on greenfield land, which is outside the settlement boundaries of both Grange Park and Quinton, and it's therefore, as I said before, in the open countryside. The site is not currently allocated for development, and consequently, as set out in the report, there is a conflict with the development plan in relation to joint core strategy policies S1, S3 and R1 and Part 2 local plan policies SS1 and LH1. There is some harm, therefore, to the development plan spatial strategy due to the development being within a rural location, not being allocated through a plan-led process. However, the site directly abuts the Northampton-related development area as defined in the joint core strategy, along a substantial portion of its boundary. Policy S4 relates specifically to the NRDA and states that whilst Northampton's needs will be met primarily within the existing urban area, additional development to meet Northampton's needs will only be supported if it meets the vision, objectives and policies of this plan. Therefore, policy S4 does potentially support development over and above the allocations in the joint core strategy and Part 2 plans, but only where there is demonstrable need and where a proposal meets the visions, objectives and policies of the joint core strategy. Policy S4 is therefore arguably the key decision-making policy in relation to this application. As set out in the report, the proposal, subject to conditions and on balance, is considered to meet the vision, objectives and policies of the joint core strategy. As per the Land West of Brackley appeal in January of this year, the council is currently unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. Consequently, the tilted balance is engaged and the policies most important within the development plan for determining the application, i.e. those relating to housing delivery, are considered out of date. The site is included as a proposed allocation in the current Regulation 18 draft local plan consultation, which was published and subject to public consultation earlier this year. Whilst the emerging plan could be subject to change and can only be given limited weight at this time, the proposed allocation does lend some further weight to the case for the site being in a broadly sustainable location. As set out in the report, the proposal would result in landscape and visual harm to the site itself and some visual harm to views from outside, particularly from Foxfield Country Park. However, whilst impacts within the site would be significant, outside the visual harms would be relatively limited. Due to topography, a physical gap intervening mature vegetation and the proposal's landscaping strategy, there is not considered to be undue coalescence with Quinton, whose identity as a separate rural settlement would be preserved. In relation to all other material considerations, the proposed impacts could be sufficiently mitigated through conditions or obligations as set out in the recommendation. The application has received 540 objections from local residents. The most common objections relate to impacts upon infrastructure and services, such as schools and healthcare, highways and traffic impacts, loss of green space, open countryside and coalescence to Quinton, and the development constituting an isolated and unsustainable form of development, although a large number of other concerns were raised. There were also objections from a number of local parish councils, including Grange Park and Quinton, as well as Anglian Water, the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England, and the British Horse Society. A full list of objections is set out in the report and in the written updates. In addition to the above, there were 2 submissions in support of the application. In terms of the updates, the committee's attention is drawn to the written updates, and in particular, the additional representations received, the corrections to the report, and the amendment to condition 6 to include a requirement for lighting along the shared footway cycleway on Wootton Road. There are no other updates on this item. To summarise, the benefits arising from the development include, but are not limited to, delivery of a significant amount of market and affordable housing, improve public transport, walking and cycle links, non-statutory biodiversity net gains, and a significant contribution to the economy through investment in construction, employment opportunities and household expenditure. The proposal would deliver 45% affordable housing, which is over and above the requirements of Joint Core Strategy Policy H2 and Part 2 Plan Policy LH8, which both require 35%. Provision of this quantum of affordable housing, which would be up to 383 units, is in this location is accepted by colleagues in strategic housing and is considered a net benefit. In this instance, officers conclude that the conflict with parts of the development plan and identified limited and localised landscape and visual harm, on balance, when applying the tilted balance because of the shortfall in land supply, do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the identified benefits, or significant benefits, and the contribution the proposal would make to the government's objective of significantly boosting the supply of homes. Consequently, it is recommended that planning permission should be granted, subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement in accordance with the heads of terms outlined in the report and the conditions set out in the recommendation and the written updates. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions from the committee, please? Councillor Purcell.
Thank you, Chair. A number of questions. One is, we have a brownfield first policy in Northampton. Are there sites within Northampton that could be developed first before we go on to a greenfield site such as this?
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, we certainly have policies which encourage brownfield-led development. And there's a number of existing allocations in the local plan that allocate brownfield land. I think when brownfield land becomes available, the council does what it can to encourage the delivery of that. But it's not like a sequential test. It's not a case that if there's a brownfield site, you therefore would refuse a site elsewhere. Each application has to be assessed on its merits. Nothing would preclude development on greenfield land. I would probably go so far as to say, the vast majority of development that occurs in West Northampton is on greenfield land because the amount of brownfield land is not that significant. Brownfield sites are quite complex to bring forward, and they can take quite a long time as well. So I think obviously, for the purposes of today, we have an application before us that we need to consider on its merits in the context of where we're at with the housing land supply, etc.
Second question, sorry, Chair, can I sort of go on? The second question is, are there any allocated sites within West Northamptonshire within the existing plan that have not been brought forward yet?
I don't know. I think there are some which have not yet commenced, or possibly even some that don't yet have full consent, I think. And there's a number of others which are in the early stages or maybe possibly coming forward at a slower rate than was anticipated. And I think that's partly why the council's now in the scenario it is with not being able to demonstrate a 5-year land supply.
Yes, but we've got to have very good reason. What I'm thinking of, we've got to have very good reasons to go against our existing development plan. So if there are sites around, and I think of North West Daventry as one that's already allocated, why is that site not being first brought forward? But that's a matter for the committee to decide.
Yeah.
I think.
Sorry, if I could just come up. I mean, I think that obviously the delivery of other sites is not really a matter for determining this application. But sorry, I've lost my train of thought actually.
Yeah, and my third question relates to, if we approve this application, can we include it in our land supply figures for as of now? So will the approval of this application immediately put these 850 houses into the land supply figure that we're able to use when dealing with other applications?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think we can necessarily include all 850. We could only include what was likely to be reasonably delivered within 5 years. And on a major site like this, there's going to be a certain amount. You would need to obtain reserve matters consent. You'd need to discharge conditions that need to be commencement on site. So only a proportion of this development could possibly contribute to the 5-year land supply.
So that really doesn't help us with our problem as local authority here. I mean,
Just to clarify, I think, as Dan kind of was intimating, if the site was consented, then a proportion of the site would contribute towards the council's 5-year supply. But obviously 850, it has to be what's going to come forward within that.
I asked the developer that question as well. Thank you. Yeah.
Councillor Keeble.
Thank you. It's a perennial one, but you've got what looks like a very generous allocation for affordable and social housing, but what's the breakdown? Because clearly there's a very big distinction between the affordability of those two, and there's a big pressure on for properties at the social end. And I linked to that is I'm guessing it's way too early, but will the developers have a partner to actually deliver the social housing, so that we're not in the position that we've been in, you know, where we might have to take over, we might have to assist in delivering some of the Section 106 obligation.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I think to come back on the second question first. So ultimately, what you would normally have is that a developer would build the market and the affordable, and then they would be provided to a registered provider. One of the things that we would be looking for is what's called pepper potting of the affordable. So you would have smaller clusters of those rather than putting it all in one block. And I think for another developer to come in and deliver it on a pepper potting basis would possibly be, I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but it would normally be one developer build it and then provide them across to a registered provider. On the first question, as to the amount of, or sorry, the tenure of the affordable housing, just pointing to paragraph 7.232, I think is the best, which states that 70% of the affordable would be
I think I've seen that pointed. I mean, there's not a very clear breakdown as to what would be social to rent. That's my point.
Yes.
And the lack of clarity can mean it all creeps up market.
Yeah, so in terms of that, you've got 70%, which would be affordable rented products, which would be a mixture of social rent or affordable rent, which is just below market. There's nothing currently in the relevant policy, because we're in the former South Northants area here, that would dictate exactly what proportion of that rent was either social rent or market rent. It would be a matter for discussion through negotiating the Section 106.
Right, and there's no indication now?
There's not any indication at the moment, no. I mean, I've spoken with colleagues in strategic housing, and obviously they're aware of it, and it would be part of discussions with the developers taking that forward.
Can I come back on that? Because I can completely understand the points about the pepper potting in relation to a certain scale of development, but this is a very, very large development. And it would be reasonable to think you might have some clusters of property such that it might be possible to attract a different provider or some different arrangement. I wonder why they've gone for pepper potting throughout such a very, very large development.
Well, that's because that's what the council has asked for. Our current policy or approach is that normally you would have say you're on a smaller development of, I don't know, say 50 houses, you would have smaller clusters of maybe 5 to 10 as a maximum. Whereas on larger schemes like this, the permitted size of a cluster is increased to 20. So you could have clusters of that sort of size on bigger sites like this, but it's not moving into the realms of having, 50s or 100s together in blocks.
Thank you. I wonder if I could come back on a further point, which is that you've got clear commitments on primary education, on secondary education. It's much less clear. And I wonder what sort of assessment has been done. I think it finishes off by saying it would depend on the final housing mix, but I just wonder what assessment has been done of the secondary school requirements in the area and where this development sits with that. Because again, for such a large development, you would expect that there would be a much clearer commitment about provision of secondary education as well as primary.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, with regard to secondary, I think it's just as set out in the recommendation that it's just a financial contribution to serve secondary education facilities in the local area. It's ultimately would be for the education authority, as it were, to decide how that money was best spent in the schools in the close area around the site, secondary schools, to accommodate the extra demand in pupils.
Okay, so there's not a commitment to having any particular provision on here. And
no.
No, and the one other thing was that there seemed to be, unless my reading of it was wrong, a bit of a discrepancy between at one point saying that there would be provision of, I think, a nursery school or some early years provision, and elsewhere, I think it was a financial contribution, and those are slightly different in terms of how they might work out in reality. I just wonder if there is a clear commitment about the early years.
Well, again, the early years, it's just been requested as a financial contribution to be provided on, I'm assuming, potentially existing facilities or the delivery of a new facility somewhere close by.
Yeah, my concern is that one of the big issues that a lot of people have with a large development is a lack of infrastructure. And the schools are obviously an absolutely key one in all of that.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes early years provision can be delivered within primary schools, and I have seen that on recently constructed new schools. As I said, ultimately, it's going to be a matter for the education authority as to how that money is spent and where the provision is made.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I think the committee needs to focus particularly on the weightings here, because you acknowledge in the report that we are still working with the Joint Core Strategy and the South Northants Local Plan, which is valid until 2029. So from my perspective, the issue relating to what may or may not be in future local plan is sort of irrelevant in this instance, because we haven't yet digested, I don't think, all of the feedback from Reg 18. We've not had a Regulation 19 yet. So therefore that plan has not been put forward, it's not been inspected. So would you agree that weighting has to be on the existing local plan, which clearly went through that due process, as well as the Joint Core Strategy? I note that you make very specific references to several key policies where this doesn't comply, S1, S3, R1, and various other ones in the Joint Core Strategy. The only one that seems to be valid, in inverted commas, is the S4 issue. So could you just elaborate on that and give your perspective on weighting? Because to me, that seems to be the key issue here is, are we working with an existing local plan? Councillor Purser has mentioned there appear to be sites in there that were allocated through that extensive process that have not yet come forward. So this seems to be a new one. And on some of those key policies, it seems dubious in terms of whether it fits against those existing policies.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So in terms of those policies, yes, there's when you read them, on face value, there is some conflict with those policies that I've set out. And the requirement first and foremost is to determine applications in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And one of those material considerations would be the MPPF and the requirement for maintaining an adequate supply of housing. And obviously the council is unable to demonstrate that at present, as I think formally agreed in April, was it? There was a committee meeting. And in light of the appeal decision we had earlier in the year. So when that occurs in relation to the MPPF, essentially the policies in the development plan that relate to the delivery of housing, i.e. those that we're saying there's conflict with, are deemed to be out of date. So obviously the weight to be attached to them arguably reduces, and I've gone through in the report as to how you potentially would still apply weight to those in that context. And then the MPPF says that, I don't have the wording before me, but I think it says essentially says something along the lines of you would grant permission unless the harms that you identify significantly and demonstrably, not just on a flat balance. So you would have to get to a point of being able to demonstrate significant amounts of harm in order to refuse planning permission.
Chair, if I may just come back on that. I agree that that is a point that's very relevant to this, but we have that issue relating to lack of 5-year land supply based on one appeal. And I understand there is work going on at the moment in the council to actually work on those numbers. So my point is that that's been tested just once, effectively.
It has, but subsequent to that, a report was then taken to, was it policy committee? Yeah. Policy committee in April, which essentially I think was the council's formal, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially the council formally endorsing that position.
It was endorsing that more work was needed to be done to evaluate whether or not we were in that position. That's the key point. It didn't say, yes, we entirely agree. That's my interpretation of that policy meeting, having sat on it, that it was actually more work needed to be done to work out exactly where we were.
And obviously the council every year undertakes a review of the 5-year land supply, and that's been occurring, I believe, over the last couple of months. And at some point fairly imminently, the figure, if it hasn't been already, for this year will be published. And obviously that will set the council's new position as it sees it in terms of having a 5-year land supply or not. But I think for the purposes of today, unless anyone wants to correct me, but I think the council's position is that we don't have one.
Until we can prove otherwise, tilted balance is in effect. So it will need to be taken into consideration. And weightings are your personal views on this one, Councillor. Is there any other questions from Councillor Furman? Oh, sorry, Sian, did you want to come in first?
Sorry, Councillor Furman, can I just remind everyone about paragraph 49 of the MPPF, which talks about the weight given to emerging policies as well as old policies and the limited weight that gives to both of them. But as Councillor Packer has said, the decision on weight and how much weight is to the decision makers, which is the members before us in committee today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions, really. I just want to know, is it a transport-led scheme or a car-led scheme, particularly given the reliance on the bus service is only funded for 5 years? The other question I'd like to ask is what mechanisms are in place within Section 106 agreement to control the future of the school site, should the need for a school site not materialise?
Okay, thank you, Chair. If I take the second one first, so if the school doesn't materialise, then essentially the way the Section 106 would be drafted is that if that land, the land would have to be offered to the council for a school at a certain juncture in the development, and if for whatever reason at that time the school was no longer required, the applicant would be free to do what they wanted, well, not necessarily what they wanted, subject to planning. They would be free to pursue other ends with that site. That would be a normal scenario that yeah, it's the financial contribution would be paid, but if for whatever reason in the future, the council decided it doesn't actually need that site for a school, then the developer would be, or landowner would be, free to pursue other uses. On the first point, I mean, in terms of whether it's car-led or sustainable transport-led, the proposal submitted with a travel plan, which seeks to deliver a reduction in dependency on car usage. The provision of the bus service, which is an hourly bus service from 7 in the morning till 7 in the evening, Monday to Friday, as you say, funded for 5 years. I mean, that's a fairly normal arrangement that the funding is there to subsidise the service until the population and the usage increases to the point that it's hopefully self-sustaining going forward. It would be a new dedicated service to and from the site, between the site and the town centre. Obviously, you know, you can't really seek to have something funded in the long term, because if it did become self-sustaining, then the funding, you shouldn't be asking for the funding because it's not needed. And if it's not, then at what point it's difficult to say whether it's 7 years, 12 years, whatever. So in that sense, I think that, you know, in consultation with colleagues from Highways, we're quite happy that the scheme delivers, you know, appropriate access for walking and cycling and appropriate provisions for public transport that would enable a sufficient reduction in car dependency to meet the targets of the travel plan. Thank you.
Sorry, it was just coming back on the point that Councillor Harris raised, and I've just draw members' attention to paragraph 9.13 of the committee report in the planning balance and conclusions, which, if I just read it, it says, even if the council could demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing and the tilted balance was not engaged, i.e. the proposal was determined on a flat balance, the material considerations, including draft allocation and benefits identified, would, on balance, still outweigh conflict with the development plan. So that's the officer's conclusion on that point. Thank you.
Councillor Keeble.
Thank you. This is perhaps from a bit of a different angle, but one of the things that surprised me about this housing development, given the size and the location of it and the proximity to employment areas, was the comparatively low density of the housing. Overall, it's round about, if my maths is right, about 19 units per hectare. Now, that obviously includes the open space and such like, but that's the average. I wondered what your comments are on that, because given the location and the proximity of, you know, very mixed sort of employment markets, I was surprised to see the housing density at that level. I mean, it's lower actually than the Brackley one as well.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I think, yes, if you're taking it at purely the site area calculation, then the density possibly does come out at a lower amount. I think within the actual built areas, the developable areas, so on the parameter plan where we saw the grey areas on there, the density is much higher. I mean, I don't have a figure, but I'm assuming it's around 30 per hectare, if not a bit more. And obviously, there's certain constraints with the site that mean that you couldn't or wouldn't necessarily choose to develop more of the site. You could hypothetically fit more houses within there, but there's the requirement for the mitigation for the SPA, so the SANG mitigation. There's buffers around, well, there's the tree belt, there's buffers around retained trees and hedges, watercourse, buffer to the motorway, there's the allotments, there's various other things that mean that you actually end up with quite a sizable proportion of the site that's not being built on, which, yes, when you then take it at face value as a density for the whole site, it comes out lower. But where there is a developable area, it's being developed at an appropriately efficient density.
And is it envisaged it's all going to be sort of housing units? It's not going to be flat or high rise of any type?
Off the top of my head, I mean, we don't have, I don't think, an exact housing sort of mix at the moment, but there are provisions set out that would limit the height of development. We're not looking at high rise, you know, multi-story sort of development. I think it would basically be predominantly normal housing, you know.
Councillor Purcell?
Can I just check on the process again? And it might be that our legal advisor can advise us on this. There are changes in the role of planning committees. Would the reserved matters items in relation to this in this application come back to this committee for consideration, or is this our only opportunity to question this particular application?
Through you, Chair. I understand that reserve matters can come back if you feel that a reserve matters needs to come back before committee. It can come back before committee. Sorry, there wouldn't be any problems. I think it's not the last opportunity, as this is outlined. It's the principle of the development on this site that is what you're being asked to grant planning permission for. Thank you.
Just to add to that, we're just waiting. The transitional arrangements haven't come into place yet. So in theory, if you look at it at face value, it looks like reserve matters, as long as it's below 500, is delegated. So as this is more than 500, you would get to deal with it through Schedule 2. But Schedule 2, as you've seen, is actually automatic delegated unless agreed by the Chair of Planning Committee and Chief Planner. But I would assume a case of this size, you would get to approve reserve matters through the committee.
Thank you.
We don't know
That's
the transitional
useful.
arrangements
Yeah,
yet.
thank you very much.
Okay, do we have any other questions from committee before we move on to public speakers? Councillor Harris?
Yeah, rather a point of clarification. The paragraph that was read out, the 9.13, I just want to clarify that it's talking about even if we had this 5-year land supply issue in the mix, that the benefits identified would on balance still outweigh. That's a perspective, correct? That's up to us as a committee to determine. So that is a perspective in the report, it's not an absolute. Thank you.
Yes, all the decisions are up to you guys in the committee, Councillor Harris. Is there any other questions before we move on?
Yeah. I think just to add to that, that's absolutely correct. That's the officer's perspective. And there will be a new 5-year land supply figure released when the analysis is done. Currently, we don't have a 5-year land supply. We have to accept that position. The new 5-year land supply figure, if it's in or around 5 years, it's going to be either just below or just above. Appeal decisions are telling you, unfortunately, that the inspectors will apply a tilted balance even if you're only just over 5. You've got to be quite a way clear of 5 years to get out of a tilted balance, because there's always going to be scrutiny over the reality of how you've calculated those figures. So in reality, what that paragraph is saying to you is that we're either going to be just below or just above 5 years. So we think at the moment the tilted balance applies, but even if it's just over, we would still be in that same position. But you're correct, it's a perspective that we've presented to the committee.
Yeah, just to add to that, I appreciate that point. You know, if we're in that scenario, then we may not sit. There's no point in us sitting here to debate it effectively. So I think it's important that we just clarify that point, that we as a committee have to take a view on that and you know, take on board the comments that you make. But I think it's important that we understand that from our point of view as a committee.
Councillor Pipes.
Yeah, on this, so South Northamptonshire has or did have a 10-year land supply, didn't it? So my tilt in balance in that respect would mean I don't see the need for all this good agricultural land to be built on. Would that be good reason to say no?
Yeah, before we calculated 5-year supply across the whole of West Northamptonshire, and we were calculating 5-year land supply in the old plan areas, you were correct that the South Northamptonshire local 5-year supply was around 10 years. Is that correct?
Yes, I think so.
But we're now very clearly in a sense where we are now one local authority, and we have to consider the 5-year land supply across the entire of West Northamptonshire. So that in terms of applying planning decisions, tilted balance applies to all planning decisions in the whole of West Northants.
If I could just slightly add to that as well, Chair. So obviously there's 2 points there about whether the 5-year land supply is calculated on a West Northants wide basis or the legacy area policy basis. Obviously the figure that we have from the appeal is for the whole of West Northants. But I think the inspector from memory did also say that it should be calculated on a policy area basis. I think even if to a certain extent you go back to that point and you were to revert to the NRDA delivery, obviously Northampton persistently had a very significant shortfall, and there's not a significant amount of available land within Northampton. So with this site being abutting the NRDA and the provisions of policy S4 that allow additional development outside and abutting the NRDA where there's a need within Northampton, i.e. to address if you're going back to that policy area need within Northampton, it's sites like these arguably that is what would need to be delivered to meet Northampton's needs rather than the South Northants needs, even though it was technically in South Northants, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so on a technical point though, because it is South Northamptonshire, we shouldn't treat it as Northampton, even though if it is next to Northampton.
Well, yes, I mean, obviously we're on one authority area now, but yes, it's covered by the Part 2 plan for South Northamptonshire.
Any other questions? Okay, can I ask Andy Millichip, please, to step up? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a sound test. Can you hear me? Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Andy Millichip. I'm a parish councillor and have lived in Grange Park for 18 years. Today, I am speaking as a resident, one of the 500 people who have objected to this application. We, the people who live in Grange Park, know that we live in a very special place. We love the freedom and quality of life living on the edge of open countryside extends to us. We love how green open corridors thread their way through our development. We love how all of the different amenities, which are the foundations of a thriving community, have knitted together over the years. I'm talking about such institutions as the pub, the sports clubs, the shops, the schools, the doctors, and the dentist, and the chemist, the care home, the businesses, the 2 community centres, and the societies which use them. The One Northampton 5-year plan describes the type of community Northamptonians should live in, while we in Grange Park already live in one. The balance here is one which works. The balance between people, houses, amenities, open space and infrastructure is not easy to define, but whatever the formula is, we have it here in Grange Park. Please don't spoil it. Bolting 850 houses around the edge of Grange Park with some really superficial box ticking in terms of community amenities simply will not work. The 1,600 existing houses which form part of a healthy community, will become 2,450 houses being part of a disjointed and unhealthy community, and a valuable slice of open countryside will be lost. Why risk doing all of this harm? The developers are arguing that there is a shortage of houses in West Northants, and therefore it is more important to build on open countryside than it is to conserve already thriving communities. In his report to the committee, the planning officer aligns himself to this view when he states that West Northants Council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing supply, and so the tilted balance should be applied. Well, there's more to it than this. The question of housing supply is not so clear-cut. We would like to ask you to consider the following observations. West Northants Council is embracing the challenge of creating just one plan for the whole area. The previous draft local plan had moved away from regional targets and plans. The basic thrust was that future housing requirements would be met by building out all allocated sites and by focusing on urban regeneration. And this plan was unfolding successfully, as can be seen by the massive developments around the north and west of Northampton. Even when the incoming Labour government set increased targets, the new approach was delivering a 5-year supply. In June 2025, the annual housing availability report is published. It showed a 5.5-year supply. In October 2025, this was challenged by the Brackley appeal decision.
1 minute.
The inspector concluded that West Northants Council could only demonstrate a 4.56-year supply, and the application for 700 houses was approved. In April 2026, in response to the Brackley appeal, West Northants Planning Policy Committee received the commissioned report, 5-year land supply update. Yes, this report does say that West Northants Council cannot demonstrate a 5-year land supply, but it then goes on to say that the problem is not with the land supply, the problem is in providing the evidence that it is available. The report illustrates this with 3 examples of sites which were deleted by the Brackley inspector from the supply number because he thought they were unlikely to be approved, all of which were subsequently approved. In May 2026, the Housing Delivery Report, just 1 paragraph to go. In May 2026, the Housing Delivery Report issued 4th quarter 25-26 delivery performance. It asks the question, was the end of year requirement met? It provides the answer. In total, there were 2,130 completions on large sites, of which 620 were affordable. Extrapolating this to completions on all sites suggests that the annual requirement of 2,503 will be exceeded. This will be confirmed in the appendix to the 2026 HLA report, which we're all waiting to be published. WNC is doing a good job on housing supply.
Can we wrap it up, please?
Please do not allow the lack of evidence available to the Brackley inspector and his subsequent decision to lead you into approving poor quality and unsustainable sites and to removing more open countryside. Please refuse this application. Thanks ever so much.
Committee, any questions, please? No, thank you, Andy. You can. I'll ask Peter Shellard, please, to step up.
I'm speaking on behalf of all the residents of Quinton. Approving this application would increase the number of houses in Quinton by over 300%, devastate our residents, and destroy our continued existence as an independent village community. It would remove the buffer of land which has existed between Grange Park and Quinton since 1997, when South Northants Council agreed that Foxfields Country Park and the 3 fields between Quinton and Grange Park would combine to preserve our village's rural character, as shown on this plan. The National Planning Framework and your draft local plan emphasise that planning decisions must safeguard the countryside from encroachment and maintain separation between settlements. Your case officer once said it was important to maintain a healthy gap between Quinton and Grange Park to prevent undesirable coalescence of settlements. But coalescence is exactly what is now recommended. In essence, your officers want to merge Quinton with Grange Park, and they imply, wrongly, that planting new trees along the edges would disguise a major urban extension overwhelming a small village. As for the proposed site, its sparse facilities, lack of a GP, and inadequate public transport will all place much greater pressure on amenities in our locality. There'd be a massive traffic impact on our 2 narrow roads, at least 1.2 million extra vehicles a year, taking the total to 3 million vehicles a year. West Northants' very curious educational proposals for this area would alone mean over 2,000 vehicles a day driving children to and from school on Wootton Road. And then there's West Northants' recent approval of almost 50,000 tractor movements a year on Washbrook Lane, delivering farm waste to the nearby anaerobic digester plant. Our roads were never designed for this increase in traffic. Manor Oak's own surveyor noted the limited visibility and heavy traffic on our roads. A decade ago, your highways department told planning that our roads couldn't accommodate traffic from the 600 homes which Manor Oak originally wanted to build. And the case officer has suddenly proposed a footpath on the eastern side of Wootton Road, which would mean children crossing the road. That's unbelievably dangerous. And in any case, no purpose is served by such a pathway for children to access Caroline Chisholm School, because that school specifically excludes admissions from this site. Manor Oak's proposal for 300 homes on the field by the M1 was rejected by SNC and the inspector in 2020, partly on grounds of isolation. But your officers want to build even more homes, 370, on the very same field. In fact, only 2 years ago, your officers actually stated that all 3 fields were unsuitable for residential development. 5 of Quinton's houses would effectively be inside a construction site for 10 years and then be isolated forever within the new estate. They've asked for special mitigation, but your planning department hasn't replied to them. In particular, they're concerned about antisocial behaviour arising from the proposed perimeter walkway right next to them, and also about Manor Oak's green space irregularities, which you've seen in Mr. Zielinski's letter. The position and nature of this constricted site haven't changed since 2024, when your officers said it was unsuitable. There's no demonstrable need for 850 homes. Just a second. And all the reasons why this isn't the right place are laid out in our reply to the officer's report. The application has many harms, over 100 listed by the officer himself. Quinton isn't an empty space on a map. It's a village with 1,000 years of identity and history, and our residents care deeply about their community. Please don't destroy it. Thank you.
Any questions from committee?
Yeah.
Councillor Pipes.
The Caroline Chisholm School, you said that they weren't going to take any children from this new.
Correct.
How do you know that? Why is that?
Because their admissions map says so, which I have here.
It's full.
That school
Yeah.
expressly excludes children on this particular site
Is there a reason for that? Is it because it's full or?
because it's heavily overscribed and it
Right,
doesn't.
okay. It's quite a large school, isn't it? I've
It's
seen
very,
it.
yeah, it's
I've
a very
walked
large school. That their map is very clear to see on their website.
Right, okay. And have you got a doctor's surgery in Quinton?
No.
Where do you go?
Well, we go either to Road or to Wootton.
Right, so the new development would have to go there as well, though?
Yes, they would.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
If there were space.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Thank you, Peter. Can I ask Councillor Julie Bainbridge, please, to step up?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Julie Bainbridge and I'm a parish councillor for Grange Park. Grange Park Parish Council asked the committee to refuse this application. And I'm here today to focus on one of the fundamental concerns with this proposal. It will create a car-dependent development that fails to provide safe, accessible and inclusive movement for all residents. At its core, this is an isolated site, and that will create an isolated development. On-site facilities are not guaranteed, and residents will need to rely on services outside the site for their everyday needs. Planning policy is clear that development should prioritise pedestrian and cycle movement and provide safe and accessible for all connections. However, this is not what is being proposed here. Access to Grange Park relies on off-site routes. They require travel through the development, through the country park, and then onwards through existing streets. It's extensive, and for many people, it will not feel safe, and that matters. There are also serious concerns with the proposed walking and cycling routes along Wootton Road. This is a fast, bendy, rural road with limited visibility, and it is not overlooked. Yet this route is expected to serve school children and everyday journeys. For many people, it will not feel safe, and that matters. If people do not feel comfortable using walking routes, they will not use them. Where there is no realistic alternative, the result is increased car dependency, reduced inclusivity, and a direct contradiction of the sustainability claims being made. The proposed development includes a significant proportion of affordable housing, much of it social rent. Members must consider whether this is an appropriate location for households most dependent on safe, direct access to services. In this location, those without access to a car would be significantly affected, potentially deepening inequality rather than reducing them. And this matters. A further key concern is that much of what makes this development appear acceptable depends on off-site infrastructure and highways works. These works have not been fully assessed and are not secured in a way that provides certainty. This concern has been reinforced by the late update from the local highway authority, sort of issued within the last 24 hours before this meeting. The highway authority only now consider lighting along the proposed Wootton Road walking and cycling route necessary in the interest of user safety and to promote active travel. How can members be satisfied that the route and therefore the development itself has been fully assessed and is safe, accessible and deliverable? Furthermore, the development's SANG mitigation relies on off-site work, including enhancements to Foxville Country Park. Yet these works are not clearly defined. They lie outside the red line of the development and have not been assessed. Members are therefore being asked to approve a development where safety, accessibility and sustainability have not been demonstrated on the basis that these issues can just be resolved later through conditions and reserved matters. But this goes to the heart of whether this is a suitable and sustainable place for people to live. Therefore, I ask members, how can unsafe walking and cycling routes be considered acceptable? How can unresolved material considerations be deferred? And where is the evidence that the necessary of off-site infrastructure is deliverable, secured and sufficient? If essential infrastructure is still being identified at this late stage, how can members be satisfied that this is a suitable, safe place for people to live? If you strip away the plans and the promise, what remains is an isolated development on an isolated site, which is reliant on the private car and fails to provide safe and inclusive access for all. This is not simply about delivering housing, it's about creating homes in places where people can safely access services, feel connected and be part of a community. Good planning is about making the right decision for the long term. Good planning can come from saying no, and Grange Park Parish Council asked the committee to review this application. I'd just like to make reference to a previous discussion
Sorry, can we
regarding
wrap up,
early
please? You have
years.
had 5 minutes.
But I just wanted to factually about the financial contribution.
I have already given you over your allotted
Okay.
time, so sorry. If there's any questions from committee, then please ask them. Councillor Purser.
Could I ask you to talk about financial contribution issues, please?
So the education contributions, they have actually stated in the letter dated the 29th that there is going to be 0 contributions towards early years because they state that there is sufficient capacity, but there is no sufficient capacity within accessible access for those residents.
Through you, Chair. Just to remind councillors that education contributions and financial benefits are not material planning considerations when determining an application before you. Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Can I ask Councillor Julia Javes, please, to step up?
Before I start, Chair, can I ask the committee members, have they received and read the email that
No, sorry, you'd have to just read your statement and nothing else. No questions to the committee.
So if I can just add, that is part of our constitution, that speakers do not address the committee directly other than through their representations. There's no questions of the committee.
I'm asking the chair.
Well, that's our constitution, so.
Then you haven't read it. I am Councillor Julia Javes, representing Quinton Parish Council in this matter. QPC is appalled at the number of misleading, inaccurate, inconsistent statements that appear in the application and the officer's report. Data is out of date and drawings are flawed and sloppy. The 2024 draft local plan stated that the development of the site would compromise the physical and visual separation of Quinton from the urban area of Northampton, and concluded that the site was unsuitable for residential housing. Nothing has changed. The 2018 application submitted by this applicant for 300 houses on Site 1 was refused and dismissed on appeal precisely because of the isolated nature of the site, poor connectivity and adverse effect on the landscape character of the area. Nothing has changed. The M1 noise and pollution mitigations are totally inadequate, leaving all future occupants of Site 1 harmfully exposed. QPC have on numerous occasions highlighted the inadequacy of detention basins to cope with the rainfall runoff from the site. The calculation of the SUDS infrastructure submitted by the applicant do not comply with the Anglian Water's adoption manual. Crucially, there is no plan presented to link the sewage and foul water system to the wider network. This should have been resolved before, now, not decided later. You have been told, obviously, about the serious flooding that occurs in Site 3. For the S106 education provisions, WNC's Place Planning Department states that 35% of the children attending the proposed 420 pupil school will come from the development. The other 65% will come from nearby proposed new sites. However, their own calculations reveal 69% of pupils will come from the site. Having to wait for other developments to come on stream to provide further S106 education provision will inevitably delay the building of the on-site school, and there is no guarantee that the school will even be built, just like the Hardingstone Sue development. There has been no evidence provided that will enable a 20% modal shift away from car dependency. The applicant's travel plan is completely unrealistic, relying on unsubstantiated assumptions. The vehicle movements to and from the anaerobic digester at East Lodge will alone generate almost 50,000 HGV vehicles movements per annum, all exclusively using Washbrook Lane. It has already become a dangerous route for all road users. No assessment has been made on the 7.5 tonne weight restricted Washbrook Lane. A government document, Appendix A, HS2 Rural Road Design Criteria, requires rural road widths to be a minimum of 6.8 metres, where HGVs are likely to pass each other on a regular basis. The suggested 5.5 metre width is simply ludicrous. No assessment has been made on the Wootton Road reconstruction to accommodate the 3 metre wide cycle footpath. The officer's report states it will be on the east side of Wootton Road. Is that a typo? Last Thursday, WNC LHA were wondering if there should be street lighting on this section of a winding 60-mile-per-hour country road to enable children to attend Caroline Chisholm School, even though this site is not in the CCS catchment. These are crucial matters and are too big and important to be left until after approval.
1 minute.
Later on, the applicant will try to explain away the points we put to you, but they cannot explain away the fact that this is an ill-conceived application in the wrong place. Finally, the response by the applicant to the comments made by Quinton Parish Council is arrogant and patronising. To say that our observations are just perceptions is insulting. Our observations and diligence to reveal the truth of this application are based on reality. And we, the Quinton Parish Council, urge the committee to reject this application. Thank you for your time.
Any questions from committee?
Sorry.
No?
No. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask Fiona Morris, please, to step up? Read a statement from the MP, Sarah Ball. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yes, I'm here on behalf of Sarah Ball, the local MP. Unfortunately, couldn't be here today due to prior commitments. Dear members of the Strategic Planning Committee, I'm writing on behalf of my constituents regarding the planning application before us for a major residential development of up to 850 homes on the site adjacent to Quinton and Grange Park.
Quinton Parish Council, Grange Park Parish Council, local representatives and residents have reached out to express their deep distress and profound concern over this proposal. In 2020, an application was made to develop 300 homes on one of the 3 fields which forms part of this application, but was rejected by the Planning Inspectorate. 6 years later, the same applicant has returned with a development almost 3 times the size on the same area. Despite the 2024 local draft plan identifying this site as unsuitable due to the risk of compromising the separation between Quinton and the Northampton urban area. The physical and visual coalescence of Quinton and Grange Park is a serious concern. Historically, following the development of Grange Park, residents advised that they were given assurances that a buffer of 3 fields was intended to preserve the distinct identities of those settlements. Indeed, this concept is supported by the National Planning Policy Framework, which aims to safeguard the countryside from encroachment, but is seemingly being ignored by this application. So in moving forward with this decision, the council would be approving an application at odds not only with the NPPF, but also its own draft local plan. It is absolutely essential that the geography and infrastructure of this area is given due weight. This site is served purely by 2 very narrow unclassified roads, Wootton Road and Washbrook Lane, which already face speeding and heavy demand. The estimated 4,000 additional daily vehicle movements, particularly alongside the existing tractor and HGV traffic from the nearby anaerobic digester on the Courtine Hall estate, would overload the network. To be clear, this is a realistic estimation of traffic because the site is isolated and lacking in public transport provision, meaning car journeys are the only alternative. Local representatives also argue that the proposed 5.5 metre road widths fail to meet the standard rural design criteria, creating a safety hazard. The potential strain on the infrastructure is another major issue. The community has clearly emphasised the lack of on-site medical facilities and public transport, which they argue will place pressure on existing amenities. Questions have also been raised regarding the S106 education contributions, with local analysis suggesting that pupil yield calculations may be underfunded. Additionally, there are further questions around the attenuation basins, with residents expressing fears about that insufficient infrastructure will lead to flooding and pollution entering the Wootton Brook watercourse. Ultimately, residents feel deeply that this scale of development threatens to irrevocably change the nature of this area in conflict with planning policies, coalescing Quinton with Grange Park, putting an inordinate strain on the unsuitable roads and not providing the services or benefits appropriate an appropriate application would create. I would urge members to listen very carefully to all submissions and to challenge in their questions what has led to a sudden change in approach when this clearly was recognised as unsuitable in the past. Yours sincerely, Sarah Ballcross.
Thank you, Fiona. Can I ask Councillor Trevor Hughes to step up, please?
Good afternoon. I'm Councillor Trevor Hughes and I'm here today representing Grange Park Parish Council. I want to start with a simple question. How did this application even get this far? Because when you read the officer's report alongside the evidence from Grange Park Parish Council, something deeply troubling emerges. This report fails, not on minor points, on fundamental ones. Members have not been told, as far as I'm aware, that the West Northants Council Planning Inspector declared this site unsuitable for housing in 2020. The planning inspector has already rejected one of the 3 fields in 2020, and yet here it is again earmarked for 372 homes, 43% of the entire development, on land already refused for 300 dwellings. I ask members to look at the 2020 report before making a decision today. Members have not been told there is no on-site GP, no spare capacity at any local surgery, and no guaranteed school places. There is no local provision less than 800 metres from this development. Education provision is chaotic, unresolved, and unguaranteed. And almost every daily need of every future resident will be met by a car journey off-site, on roads already dangerous and at capacity. On Washbrook Lane alone, 50,000 tractor movements a year are predicted going to and from the local biodigester. During the site visit, we witnessed these large tractors on Washbrook Lane. This is not a sustainable location. Future residents will be car dependent by design. There are no safe walking, cycling, or public transport connections demonstrated in this application. The transport evidence relies on assumption, not a full impact assessment. Sustainable communities are not built on aspirations, assumptions, or future promises. They are built on infrastructure that is secured, deliverable, and available when residents need it. Beyond infrastructure, this development would permanently destroy productive agricultural land, erode the separation between Grange Park and Quinton, and damage the character and tranquility of Foxfield Country Park. I want members to be in no doubt about where the community stands. The proposed coalescence with Grange Park is rejected by residents. They've engaged seriously, submitted detailed evidence, and raised legitimate concerns throughout this process. They deserve a committee that takes that seriously today. Grange Park Parish Council puts it simply: the adverse impacts outweigh the benefits. I agree. The site is unsustainable by the council's own assessment. The infrastructure isn't there, the planning case isn't made. I will be supporting refusal of this planning application, and I urge every member to do the same. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions from committee, please? Councillor Pipes?
Do we know why the land was unsuitable? Have we got an explanation for that?
Can't tell you off the top of my head, but I know it went to appeal and then it was refused at appeal.
Officers, do we know why it was unsuitable in 2020?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the scheme that was for 300 was refused on the basis of the proposal not constituting sustainable development. That was, so it's not that the site was ruled out, it was that the proposal before the inspector on that land for 300 dwellings wasn't deemed to be, in that scenario, in that context at that time, the inspector found that it wasn't sustainable development.
Any other questions? Thank you, Councillor Hughes.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask Councillor Craig Morris, please, to step up?
Chair, thank you. Members, panel, thank you for allowing me to present you today. I'm very grateful. I'm one of the ward councillors for Nen Valley Ward. So within that ward, I represent residents from Grange Park, and I'm here for that purpose today. Basically, residents across Grange Park have contacted me in significant numbers of late about this particular application, as you can imagine. They've emailed me, they've written to me in various forms. I've bumped into them in the street at various events, and to be fair, the response from all has been rather negative towards this particular proposal and development. I've yet to find anyone that's in support of it. And that's my genuine concern, and the reason why I'm here today to present you these things. While not everyone shares the same view of the overwhelming message, has been remarkably consistent. People are deeply concerned about what this development would mean for their community, as you've heard. This is not opposing housing. Residents understand that West Northamptonshire needs new homes and that growth is, of course, inevitable. They all know that. They question the proposal that presents the right development. That's what they're looking for, in the right place, at the right time, and supported by the right infrastructure. You've heard that several times already. It's critically important. The concerns repeatedly are practical, genuine, and rooted in lived experience, certainly from Grange Park. Residents already experience congestion on local roads. They struggle to get access on stretched services. They look at a development of this scale and ask a simple question. If existing infrastructure is already under pressure, how will it cope with hundreds of additional homes? Ask yourself that question, panel, please. I have also heard repeatedly about the value of the countryside surrounding Grange Park. To residents, this land is not simply an empty space waiting for development. It forms part of the setting, the character, and the identity of the community. Once lost, it cannot be replaced. Hold that thought in your minds, please. They question whether the proposal aligns with the principles of sustainable growth that, of course, we're all expected to uphold. Members, I fully appreciate that your role is not to conduct a referendum here. Planning decisions must be made on planning grounds and in accordance with policy. However, local voices matter. The concerns being expressed, certainly from Grange Park and wider, are not emotional reactions to change, nor are they the views of a vocal minority. They are thoughtful concerns raised by people who care deeply about their community and who want to see growth delivered in a way that is sustainable, proportionate, and supported by the necessary infrastructure. A point I've made several times now. An extremely important point to listen to today, certainly for you guys and girls in front of me. Planning decisions are made in this chamber, but their consequences are lived every day by the communities that we represent. Today, I ask only that those voices are given the weight and the consideration that they deserve. Whatever decision is reached, I hope this committee recognises the depth of feeling that exists within Grange Park and Quinton, and the genuine concerns residents have about the long-term future of their community.
1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions from committee, please? No? Thank you, Councillor
Chair.
Morris. Thank you. Can I invite Democratic Services to read out a statement submitted by Councillor Fiona Cole, please?
A statement from Fiona Cole, Chair and members of the committee. As ward councillor for Quinton Parish, I speak in objection of this application. The other objectors, as I'm sure, will cover multiple valid points, and I'd like to focus on a few key areas. 1, the planning inspector's decision to dismiss the appeal by Manor Oak Homes. from their first failed attempt at an application to develop the site. 2, the officer's report, which omits, misrepresents and/or understates material considerations. 3, significant new highways and access proposals have emerged late in the process without proper scrutiny, assessment or impact evaluation. 4, the tilted balance principle. 1, Planning Inspector's 2020 decision. I ask members to look very carefully at the Planning Inspector's decision of December 2020 before reaching a decision on this application. He dismissed Manor Oak Homes' appeal on this very site, and his conclusion was clear. The site was poorly connected, heavily reliant on private car travel, unsustainable in location, harmful in terms of increased congestion and emissions, and contrary to the vision and objectives of the Joint Core Strategy. Those findings were not marginal concerns, they were the central reasons why the appeal was dismissed. The critical question for members today is this: what has changed? The answer is very little. The site remains in exactly the same location. The distances to genuine and substantive services remain the same. The dependence on private vehicles remains the same. The lack of direct connectivity remains the same. The fundamental planning weaknesses previously identified remain the same. Indeed, if anything, the position is now worse. The current scheme actually amplifies the inspector's concerns because it is nearly 3 times larger than the development previously rejected. It is difficult to see how a site found to be unsustainable for 300 dwellings suddenly becomes sustainable for 850 homes, and such a significant increase in people. 2, tilted balance. The officer report relies heavily on the tilted balance arising from the current housing land supply. However, the tilted balance does not mean that every site should be approved, and nor should it be used as a free pass for development in an inherently unsustainable and inappropriate location. It does not require members to disregard the development plan nor ignore a detailed and relatively recent planning inspector's decision on the same site and the harm that outweighs the benefits, or be minded in favour simply because the council wants to meet housing targets via a path of least resistance. 3, officer's report. Also of great concern is that the officer's report does not fully or fairly present a number of important matters raised by Quinton Parish Council, Grange Park Parish Council and local residents. The report understates the significance of the inspector's previous decision, does not properly explain the long-standing planning rationale behind maintaining separation between Quinton and Grange Park. It gives insufficient weight to the extent of local concern regarding coalescence and the loss of the open gap between settlements, something which essentially a row of trees as proposed does not fix. And it presents conclusions on sustainability that sit uneasily alongside evidence findings that this site would increase car dependency, lengthen journeys and fail to provide genuinely sustainable access to services and facilities. 4, unassessed and unevaluated elements added very late in recent weeks. Finally, members should be cautious about determining this application when significant new elements have emerged late in the process. Changes relating to highways, roads, road widening, pedestrian and cycle infrastructure and new crossing arrangements appear to have been introduced at a very late stage, even in recent weeks, none of which have been correctly assessed or evaluated, but appear to have been included as potential lip service in response to objections and concerns raised, rather than from due and full consideration. Despite these matters being raised by parishes and residents years ago, this raises important questions about highway safety, landscape impact, environment and deliverability. These matters have not been subjected to the level of public scrutiny, evaluation or impact assessments that many residents, professional planning, good practice and public safety matters that are essential. In conclusion, members should ask themselves whether they have all the information necessary to make a robust and defensible decision regarding this significant development, which will have both local and wider reacting significant consequences. In my view, there are only 2 reasonable options before the committee today: either conclude that the inspector's concerns remain unresolved and refuse the application. Do you want me to go to the end?
I just wanted to.
Or conclude that the late emerging highways and access proposal require the correct assessment and defer the application until that has been undertaken.
Thank you. Can I also invite Democratic Services to read out a statement submitted by Councillor Laura Coos, please?
This is a representation from Councillor Laura Coos. Chair, members of the committee, I urge you to refuse this application for clear and defensible planning reasons. First, conflict with a plan-led approach. This site sits outside the intended development framework. It is not required to meet identified need in this location. Approving it would undermine a plan-led system and open the front door to further unplanned expansion. Second, an unsustainable location. This is a car-dependent development with limited, indirect, and in places unsafe walking and cycling connections. It is not well integrated with existing communities or services. This is not sustainable growth. Third, cumulative impact is already significant. This part of Northampton has seen multiple large developments. Even the officer report acknowledges cumulative pressure. This proposal adds to that concentration without demonstrating that the area can absorb it. Fourth, infrastructure is not secured in reality. Financial contributions are proposed, but contributions are not delivery. There is no certainty that roads, healthcare and local services will be provided in step with this growth. Without that certainty, the impact falls on existing residents. Fifth, the environmental and assessment gaps remain. An environmental impact assessment should remove doubt. Here, key concerns remain around off-site works, connectivity and wider impacts. Where uncertainty remains, the decision should err on the side of caution. Sixth, the 1998 agreement cannot be brushed aside. This agreement was put in place to manage development in the public interest in May 1998. There is no clear, transparent explanation of how its intent is being honoured or lawfully set aside. Ignoring it risks setting a damaging precedent and undermining trust in this committee's decision. This agreement was sent through to WNC Legal at least 8 months ago, if not longer, and despite numerous requests for response, I've only ever received one acknowledgement to advise they will look into it and get back to me. WNC Legal Department have never contacted me to outline any legal position. Allegedly, WNC Legal Department have not responded to any contact made by Grange Park Council either in this regard. Seventh, Caroline Chisholm School will not be taking any children from the new development. This is not a scheme in isolation. It is part of an extensive pattern of growth without the infrastructural planning coherence to support it. If approved, we are not shaping sustainable communities. We are reacting to pressure and hoping infrastructure catches up later. It rarely does. For those reasons, policy conflict, unsustainable location, cumulative harm, uncertain infrastructure, unresolved impacts and governance concerns, I ask you to refuse this application.
Thank you, Diana. Can I ask Jeff Armstrong, please, to step up?
Thank you, Chair. I did prepare a speech for presentation today, but clearly there's been an avalanche of comments which have come forward. I will try and deal with them as much as I can as we progress through, but clearly it may be appropriate for councillors to ask questions at the end if I can help in any of the matters which have been raised today. Firstly, I would just want to cover 2 points. One is this application has been before your officers for over 3 years, which is an extensive, one of the longest applications I've ever dealt with in my life. During that time, we met with your officer on a regular basis, statutory consultees on a regular basis. We discussed all, and I'll say all of the comments which came in. No comments were left unresolved. Clearly, we couldn't deal with all of those comments, and as you've heard today, there are fundamental objections from the parish councils, and we understand that because we met the parish councils very early on in the process and we understood their concerns. And wherever we can, we try to address them. So for this 3 years, we responded positively to a series of issues as and when they came up, to a point where the application before you today has no objections from statutory consultees and is strongly recommended to you by your case officer and officers on the stage. In planning terms, we can do no more than present that information to you, and it is extensive. There is no assumptions which have been made, which we've been accused of, that we have cast aside points because we didn't like them. Your case officer has constantly asked us to address points as and when they come up. So I think I would urge you to take the recommendation and the evidence in the committee report as being the absolute truth and the result of long and hard work with all of your officers. It's been suggested to you today that's not true and that there are lots of hidden issues which haven't been dealt with, but that is not the case. And I would urge you to follow the recommendation. The other issue which has come up along many is the issue about the application from 2020, which went down. That is a completely different application. Whilst it's on a third of the site before you today, it was a residential only scheme. It didn't have the sustainable elements which we are offering. And I'll just read out what they are. We are offering 2.1 hectares for a new primary school. And again, on the education, the contributions we are providing are for early years, primary, secondary, and for post-16. So all the contributions we've been asked to deliver, we are delivering through the 106 mechanism, which, as you know, is the standard approach for dealing with contributions. There's nothing untoward or behind the scenes in any of this. We've been asked for those contributions. Those contributions have been tested by your officers as being SIL compliant, and we have agreed to provide those through the 106 and in the triggers, more importantly, as requested by the statutory consultees and by your officers. We're providing a new local centre. Again, there was no local centre as part of the previous application. That local centre will include a shop, it'll include a community facility. We're talking about a creche, potentially health facilities, potentially pharmacy. Now, they're all uses which are set out and will be secured by condition as part of this application. That's condition number 5. And we are committed to ensure that they are delivered. There was no such offer for the 300 unit scheme at all. We're providing a 2-hectare extension for the Foxfield Country Park, an important facility in the area, and we're going to be providing a significant extension to that. A brand new regular bus service, which will be an hourly service running from 7 o'clock till in the evening. That wasn't provided before. All of those will add towards the sustainable nature of the scheme, including the new footpaths, which your officer explained, which weren't before the inspector when he considered the 300 unit scheme. We've talked about the housing land supply. We've talked about the 5-year supply, about whether there is one or whether there isn't one. Clearly, at this moment in time, there isn't a 5-year housing land supply. And as you were advised, even if there was one, it's going to be very marginal. The recommendation in the committee report was to approve, but as you were pointed to a paragraph, which was to say that you should approve, even if there wasn't a 5-year housing land supply. So there are, if you feel concerned about the housing land supply, there is still the evidence and support from your officers for this scheme to come through today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from committee, please? Councillor Pipes.
You're going to make financial contribution of £1,470 per dwelling towards the improvement and expansion of existing primary healthcare facilities in the local area to serve the development.
Yes.
Where is that going to be? Because you were saying there's possibly, as part of the community centre, a doctor's surgery or pharmacy, or healthcare facility rather. Is that where it's going to go?
It would go to, at the time of when the reserve matters are submitted, which we discussed earlier today, then discussion will happen about how best to spend that particular financial contribution. Now, if there is going to be a facility on site, then that contribution would be spent on part of that facility. If there isn't going to be one on site, then it will be spent on upgrading an existing facility. So there are two options on this site, which is fairly unique, that it could be on site or it could be off site. Most situations are that it would be an off site facility.
Can I just refer back to Councillor Cous's statement she made, paragraph 4. She's our cabinet member for health.
Fourth, infrastructure is not secured in reality. Financial contributions are proposed, but contributions are not delivery. There is no certainty that roads, healthcare and local services will be provided in step with this growth. Without that certainty, the impact falls on existing residents.
Yeah, it's the healthcare bit I was centering on, really.
Well, I think the point I was making, Councillor, is that that's not correct. All those contributions, whether they are financial contribution, work contributions, off-site or on-site contributions, as you know, will be secured through the Section 106, which is a standard process. So I think it's rather misleading to say that they can't be secured. They will definitely be secured, and there will be a requirement for the developers of these sites to bring forward.
Councillor Gaskell.
Thank you, Chair. During the planning processes, you were aware that the country park should act as a buffer between Quinton and Grange Park, and it should have been protected as a small rural community. That buffer was clearly intended and embedded in the original scheme. So how have you managed to put houses on the other side of that wedge as part of your design?
Well, the country park is clearly protected, and for good reason. There was never any intention to propose development or impact upon the country park in any way. The rest of the land is not protected. Obviously, there were some suggestions that the land is protected, and there was reference to previous legal agreements. But as your officers have advised in the committee report, and as we've got legal advice from a KC, there is no protection specifically on those particular areas of land with the 3 parcels which we are bringing forward for development. Whilst they are clearly open countryside and benefit from the normal protection which open countryside does have, in the situation we find ourselves in with the tilted balance and such a huge housing need, those 3 sites coming forward for development fit with the planning policies and fit with the advice from your officers. So there's never any impediment on those 3 sites coming forward.
Okay, so the planning committee at South Northants, they approved the development of it, with that being reconfirmed that would act as a buffer between Grange Park and Quinton. And you're putting houses directly in between there now, so that buffer's no longer there.
There is no buffer identified as such. In fact, the Grange Park neighbourhood plan, which has recently been adopted, also doesn't seek to secure buffers on the application site either, although I believe the parish council tried to do that, but the examiner said that wasn't reasonable and wasn't consistent with the local plan. So there is no, as I said, there's no policy position or 106 agreement or neighbourhood plan policy which would prevent these 3 sites from coming forward for development.
Okay, through you, Chair, I don't know if that any impact from the planning officers or not, but obviously when Grange Park was approved, the intention was there was going to be that green buffer was protecting, and it sounds like it's not been protected. There's no protection in place.
Well, if you look at the committee report, the officer spends some time in explaining that the 106 agreement, which is referred to, refers to these areas of land, but that was only specifically for that application, not for any other application coming forward. So there is no legal 106 restriction running with that land or planning policy with that land, which would prevent the site from coming forward. And just if I can point to you, I know we're giving limited weight to the emerging allocation, which is the right thing to do, but your officers have received legal advice, have looked into land availability. Your policy team are recommending this site comes forward as a draft housing allocation. Now, clearly, if there was any impediment on the site to be developed, they wouldn't have been presenting it because they would have other options which they would bring forward rather than this one.
And with due respect, it's our job to scrutinise this.
Absolutely.
So that was my question.
Sorry, Chair, just want to interrupt. The agent is correct that the planning application that had a protected area in 1998, being 28 years ago, was specific for that planning application because it wasn't held down by any policy or any policy recommendations or site-specific allocations. It made that development back in 1998 acceptable in planning terms, which is why it formed part of the 106 agreement. This is a new application before you, a new stage in development, and 28 years ago, a lot can change. And that includes national planning policy frameworks and 5-year land supplies. And because it's not linked to any policy, you are to consider it with the policy before you, which is that it can be allocated for housing if that is how you determine it to be. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Purser.
Bit of a technical issue here, but well, firstly, just to say, I don't think our officers strongly recommended acceptance. I think this was an on-balance recommendation. So there's a difference between strongly recommending and on-balance. But the real question I've got for you is, given this is an outline application, by June 2031, how many houses would you expect to be built on this site?
In the submission for the application and the work we've been doing with the local plan, we've assumed in the order of 375 houses to come forward within the 5 years. 375. Now, that assumes that there are 2 to 3 developers on the site working together. There are 3 separate fields, 3 separate accesses that it's been designed so it can be delivered in that way. Because we're minded for the fact that this site has been released to meet housing needs. So we've looked at the way to deliver the most effective and efficient way possible. So it's in the order of 375 for the 5 years.
Realistically, within 5 years, because I know the inspector has taken quite a sceptical view of the rate at which developments are built out. So in the past, they've been quite sort of questioning whether those numbers are actually delivered.
Yes, we're aware of the fine art of working out how many houses come forward. So we've taken a cautious approach to that. But 3 developers would be able to deliver 375. One would hope even more, but we're not saying that at this stage.
Councillor Keeble.
Thank you very much. I just wondered if you could provide some comments on the delivery of some of the infrastructure, because I see you're going to provide a site for the primary school, yeah,
Correct.
and you're going to provide a financial contribution for the preschool for the early years.
Yes.
And that's, you know, in spatial terms, those are quite often easier to provide the early years.
Yes.
What I'm concerned about is a secondary education where it says a financial contribution towards expansion of existing secondary education facilities in the local area.
Yes.
Now, I just wonder and I appreciate you've been talking about this for 3 years during which time things have changed, but what assessment has been done of where those facilities are that would be expanded? Do you know? Because I think there's a lot of pressure on all the surrounding schools.
Yes.
And at some point, I would have thought there would have to be a site allocated, but I just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
The way these things are normally worked, the contributions are worked out, is a lot of it comes down to the timing of when the reserve matters come in, because clearly there's a 3-year period before the reserve matters are submitted, and the education section of the county have some general idea now, but actually the details they would want to discuss as part of the reserve matter when that comes in. So they will have some general ideas as how that money would be spent, whether it's on improving existing schools in terms of classrooms, whether it's about employing new teachers. What the facilities are will be set out in the Education Action Plan, which the county works to. The specifics of that, because the figure we're making is based on a formula of the number of children resulting from this scheme, which would then be going to a secondary school. That money is sought and secured as part of the Section 106. The exact place for spending would then be discussed as part of the reserve matters, but it would be in the local area, and it would be either in the form of new classrooms, further expansion of schools, additional teachers, etc., etc.
Well, if I could just come back again, because this is quite a crucial issue that's been raised. There's obviously, this is in a area where there's a lot of employment, a lot of new employment, and a lot of quite sort of mixed income, shall we say, employment. And I would have expected that the educational requirements would have been quite substantial. I just wondered what your thinking was about any sort of upping of that offer, so to speak, because, you know, whether there's scope within any of what you've done for provision of facilities or anything like that at all.
Are you talking about whether a secondary school can be provided on our site?
Yeah.
The scale of
In
that
short.
would be, usually a secondary school would be of a site of sort of over 5,000, so that's not possible.
Okay. I just wondered, because it's it just looks like this is quite a big sort of hole, perhaps, but perhaps we can come back to that later. The other thing I wanted to ask was that obviously, as you have gathered from my questions earlier, the issue about social housing are really important. You talked about having several developers on the site. I wondered what your thinking was, albeit it's early stages, about the mix between affordable and social rented, and what your thinking was about providers of the social housing. Because again, you know, looking at the sort of income levels of the employment in that area,
Yes.
there could well be quite a substantial pressure point around social housing, and it would be important that that's developed early on and not, you know, like sold back to the council at the end of the
Yes.
session, which is what we've had in the
Yes.
quite recently. Just your comments on that.
Sure. I would imagine there would be probably a single housing association involved on working for the developers. And I would imagine that they would come on board very early, and they would have discussions with your housing department. And it's at that time the actual final mix would be secured. So we know it'll be a 70-30 split, as was explained by your officer. But in the actual mix would then be determined at that particular time, because it would be your housing officers would be looking to make sure that the mix met the greatest need at that moment in time. So if the need was for 2 bedrooms, then I would imagine that that's what the bulk.
Sorry to interrupt. Can we just speak up a little bit? I think some of the audience members can't hear at the back.
I'll, speak. Yeah, so the exact mix of the houses will be agreed with the housing officer at the time of when the reserve matters are submitted. The outline will secure the total number of the dwellings, the overall split between shared ownership and rented, and then at the time the greatest need would be then put forward for this site, and the housing association would then agree how best to provide that.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just thinking particularly about the mix within the rented sector between affordable rented and social housing rental, and what, you know, it'll come further down the line. Your thinking is around having a housing association.
It would that need would fluctuate on a monthly basis and on a yearly basis. So normally that your housing department and the housing association would want to wait until they know that there was a commitment to deliver the scheme. And it's at that point where they would then agree what the final mix was going to be.
I think the needs at presently are something like 1,100 families coming online each year who can't afford anything other than social housing.
I think we recognise the acute need, which is why we've increased the affordable housing provision on the site.
Councillor Harris.
Yes, just one quick question. You mentioned support for bus service once an hour. That's a limited 5-year period, I believe.
That's the standard approach, yes.
It's standard approach, but could you give me a view on timings of such a bus, evenings or weekends?
It'll run from 7 o'clock through till 7. So it's an hourly service from 7 till 7.
So if I'm working shifts, I'm stuck, basically, if I'm relying on public transport.
I think that's a discussion we could have with the bus company nearer the time, but we have to. The bus company has to run the bus.
I appreciate
so much we can do.
there's a third party here, but this issue of sustainability is quite important.
Yes.
Given its location, is it a weekend bus service as well proposed, or is it Monday to Friday?
I think it's just Monday to Friday.
Okay, so if I want to do anything at the weekends, I can't if I'm reliant on public.
Well, there are
transport.
existing bus services which are already
They're
in
limited,
place.
I
They are
believe,
limited, but they are there, and people could. So this would be a new service on top of what's already
Okay,
there.
thank you. And I just want to pick up one point regarding the comments in regard to this 1998 agreement. I accept your comment that may well relate to then, but that does not still, effectively, we still have SS2, which is a valid policy which talks about non-coalescence and individual identity of villages. So regardless of any buffer, we do have a South Northampton local plan policy which does clearly talk about not coalescing. And I think R6 would also apply. So I think it's important that even though that particular issue might apply, I think it's picked up in other policies.
Through you, Chair, policy. Thank you, Councillor Harris. I was just dealing from a legal point of view from the 106 agreement, not what the current policies have, but obviously as there's emerging local plan, the weight you give to current policies when there's an emerging local plan as shown in the NPPF is reflective on how far we are with the emerging local plan for current policies. Thank you.
Yeah, it's at that point, but I think it is referred to as fairly minimal, which is standard at this stage because we still haven't done a Reg 19.
I understand, sir. Thank you, Councillor Harris.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. The delivery of the affordables, there's a great big word here that really worries me, is viability and the build out on this. So what protections do you see being introduced in the 106 so the viability doesn't disappear and the number of houses as affordables disappears? Because we see less often. And I'm determined that we can try and do something about this. Otherwise, we're just going to have this continual challenge in relation to housing. That's the first question. And the second one is really looking back at the appeal previously on part of this site, where Stagecoach commented that considerable traffic congestion put into question their provision of a bus service. Obviously, time has passed. We have an increase in, I think, a 13.5% increase in residents in West Northamptonshire. So it's clearly, I say clearly, you would expect it to have got worse. So that concerns me in relation to Stagecoach and their provision and as to whether they would actually provide a service. And also the 5 years that you're funding that, it could be conceivable that the money has gone when the people are starting to actually potentially use the service. And that's a big concern. So viability is one. I mean, sustainability, I think, has come into it, but we'll come to that, I'm sure, later. But yeah, the viability is a huge concern, and affordability for housing. And also the other thing is, I've seen in the past, I'm a councillor of over 14 years, often people don't want to be put into housing, which is a long way out because of the accessibility. So you may get offered a property in a village or whatever, you don't pick up on that property because of its distance or the lack of services. And I see that with what Stagecoach is saying, we could easily have that in this instance.
Okay, well, perhaps accessibility first. Is clearly accessibility is public transport and other things. So in terms of the other facilities we're providing on site, there's going to be a local centre which will serve the needs of that particular, for those new residents and potentially existing residents as well. So that would reduce the car dependency. People would then hopefully not have to drive far. So people in affordable homes who have less opportunity, there will be a local centre on site for them to be able to manage their lives more fruitfully more sustainably than if there isn't one there. So I think that's a fundamental part. Sustainability needs to be looked at in the whole. The bus contribution, in the previous scheme for 300, there wasn't as you're right, the bus company didn't offer a bus service. We suggested one, and we said we would run one and fund one ourselves via a minibus. But now we've got a bigger scheme, we've got more dwellings. It's more of interest to the bus company to set up a bus which would be running an hourly service on the back of this development. So clearly they feel that it's sustainable. They feel there's potentially enough interest in them for them to have a viable and deliverable service going forward. And they were very forthcoming in this particular instance. I think that this is a different animal, which would then, because I would argue it's a more sustainable animal, we're able to help deliver those benefits which we couldn't do on the first scheme. Viability, it's an interesting point. I mean, viability is a matter contained with the NPPF. I'd imagine when the new one comes out, it'll still be in there. We have no intention of seeking to suggest viability assessments in the future. And I'm not quite sure how that can be done as part of a 106, but I would be happy to have that discussion with your officers if that was an issue you had. But clearly viability is an important planning tool. When the markets are not particularly good, when we've got particularly economic downturn, which we have at the moment, then viability is a genuine planning tool. When the markets are much better, then it isn't a planning tool. So it's something which is beyond my ability to be able to say, yes, we'll remove it as a potential on this site. But at the same time, I understand where you're coming from. And if there is any comfort we can give, we're happy to have those discussions with your officers.
Yeah, I would like to see a robust discussion around that because we have inflation, it's a fact. The bus service, I'd be interested to really understand Stagecoach's position. I hear what you said, because generally it takes 10 years for the capacity to get to the point where the bus service is sustainable. I'm afraid I don't agree with you at all about the local centre. I mean, I think that would just actually be a disadvantage to the affordable housing residents who may not have other transport options, because often these centres are more expensive. Clearly, it's not a planning consideration, but it's a human consideration. But thank you for your answers.
Any other questions? Councillor Purcell.
Yes, just you said you'd take 3 years to get to a reserved for the reserved matters to come in. Is that correct?
It's more likely than not to happen sooner than that, but the actual time frame on the application will allow for 3 years to come forward.
I still think your 375 houses is optimistic, given it's going to take that long to get to reserved matters.
No, we'd assumed it would come forward sooner than that. That there's been house builders already expressing interest in the site to Manor Oak, so we don't imagine it's going to take that 3 years period to. It's just 3 years is the technical time period placed on the consent.
Anything else? Councillor Furman.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick question, really. Through you, could you tell me, is the applicant going to retain the land for the primary school if the DFE say there's no need for a primary school?
I can't answer that question. There is, in normal circumstances for sites like this, that the sale of all of the land would happen to the developers, and then the developers would then be responsible for taking their site forward.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Chair. Just wanting to add, who owns a land or who might own the land going forward is not a matter for you as decision makers. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions for Jeff, thank you. Can I invite the officers, please, to come back on any points they wish?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of points to come back on. I think Mr. Shellard brought up a question about whether the footway cycleway on Wotton Road was on the east or west side of the highway. I think that's referring to paragraph 7.70. That is a typo. Just to be clear, that the footpath, as shown on the approved, on the proposed plans, is on the western side of the road. With regard to the point about the school admissions and whether the site was covered by Caroline Chisholm School at present, from the school admissions map I've seen, that generally covers existing built-up areas only, and the reason that the site is not on that plan is because it's currently a field. I think another point to just come back at, there was the point about whether the site sort of delivers all of the requirements for a community. I think it's just important to be clear that there's not necessarily a requirement for every site to provide every facility that's required on that site, as long as there is access to it. And obviously we've had extensive discussion with the agent with regard to walking and cycling and the public transport. There was a question around whether the off-site works, particularly highway works, had been assessed as much as possible. I think in consultation with colleagues from our housing highways team, obviously the detail of the design of those off-site works is dealt with at the section 278 stage, so the highway technical approval stage. It is controlled by condition in terms of the delivery, and the colleagues from highways are satisfied that we have sufficient detail at this time for what we require. Just check through. Covered. So with regard, there was a question from, I think, Councillor Pipes about the NHS or ICB contribution as to how that would be spent. I think the point to clarify on that is that that's a decision for the ICB or the NHS as to where that investment is made. It could hypothetically occur on site. I don't think there's any formal provision, well, there isn't any formal provision for that. It's more likely to be potentially the extension of an existing service somewhere in the local area, such as Wotton or Grange Park, to serve the site. With regard to the bus viability, so obviously the scheme does deliver funding for a new service, and there was the question about the viability of that. I think what I would again just point out is that if that's a dedicated new service between the site and the town centre, it will stop at numerous places such as Wotton or London Road, etc., between the site and the town centre, which will contribute and assist towards the viability of that bus service. So it will potentially enable, I mean, I'm talking very hypothetically, but it would potentially enable other services to be adjusted and to serve other areas. So it's not just that the only people getting on that bus service will be from this site, if that makes sense. And the other thing I did need to clarify is that in the recommendation, in the education provisions, there is a financial contribution towards early years facilities. Having just reviewed back through that with colleagues, the most recent contribution from our education team said that there was actually existing capacity within, there was capacity within the existing provision such that isn't required. Now, obviously, officers can double check that ahead of finalising the legal agreement with the developers. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can I open the application to debate, please? Anyone want to start? Councillor Purcell.
Yes, I think I'm still at questions to the officer, really. I'm interested in which we didn't discuss before, the issue of sustainability and what our definition of sustainability is in terms of a development of this sort of size. What are we really meaning for a development to be sustainable?
Thank you. I mean, I suppose it's one of those things, there's no sort of simple single definition of what is sustainable. It's an assessment of each proposal on each site. What we would be looking for is the ability for people to move, for sustainable transport options through the ability to walk and cycle to and from the site, to services, to jobs, also using public transport. Obviously, sustainability can cover almost every aspect of development, whether it's flooding or ecology or other things. So it's not very easy to give you a short, punchy definition as to what sustainability means, I'm afraid.
But we've Northampton within the existing scheme, within the existing policy within Northampton, there are a set of criteria listed as to what we expect within a sustainable development, I think, which requires a kind of a scale so that most of the provision happens within that development, health and schools and a centre and shops and so on. That's the notion of a sustainable development, that actually it is there is a level of containment rather than, some provision here, but others have to go off somewhere else for healthcare and so on. And that's where I'm slightly struggling with this application in terms of the sustainability, especially if we're having a significant amount of affordable housing and social housing as part of the development. So that's what I'm struggling with on the sustainability issue.
Thank you. I mean, just to come back, I think in order to get everything that you want on a development, you would have to make it bigger. I mean, normally there are certain thresholds in size. So if we wanted this site to deliver more, the scheme would have to arguably be bigger in order to make that viable and deliver it in terms of, the cost of providing that infrastructure. And it's not necessarily a case that we can only have developments that are, I'm plucking a figure out the air, but 2,000 houses and only ever have them at that size, because there's always smaller sites coming forward of 50, 200, etc. within that sort of scale, and those sites can't provide everything necessarily on, and they will rely on existing facilities that are in the local area.
But they wouldn't come within the terms of sustainable, development in terms of planning. In terms of the view of planning of substantial developments. And that's why kind of my kind of question about, that these are the sorts of issues that a planning inspector, when examining the overall scheme, looks at the mass of developments across an area. And that's why I'm kind of worried that we're sort of being bounced into an early decision where within 2 years, an inspector will be looking at the impact of significant developments on, the whole of West Northamptonshire and what's needed so that they are properly sustainable developments. This seems to me neither one thing nor the other. It's not small enough to piggyback on other areas, nor big enough to be a properly sustainable development. And that's why I kind of worry that it's not part of these, the examination of the plan as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just come back on that, I think there's possibly a slight difference between what is sustainable development and what is a sustainable development. A sustainable development will deliver all of that within itself, and sustainable development is more broadly development which is sustainable. I think that's possibly an important distinction.
Thank you. Do you want a proposal? Yeah, okay, fine. I'm going to propose that we agree the officer's recommendations. I recognise that this is probably not likely to be either the most successful or the most popular recommendation I have ever made. However, I do think that this application raises some serious arguments and some serious issues that we need to look at. Now, clearly, the officer's recommendation is not strongly, but it is to approve this. And it isn't on balance. There are different arguments forward, but it is to approve. Now, what I take really seriously is the enormous, is a context in which we're making this decision, which is where we know there's acute housing need. We know we don't have the housing supply. We know we don't have the pipeline. We know we particularly don't have the pipeline on affordable housing, and in particular on social housing. We might think that this is a huge amount of social housing, affordable housing. I think it works out to about 100 social housing units. That is not a huge amount of housing in the context of the fact that we have so many people waiting for housing. We're proposing shipping people up north because we don't have enough housing for them here. We really have to take seriously the issue about applications that come in for planning and for housing. And this isn't even for housing tomorrow. It's housing at best, half a quarter, a third of it in, what is it, 5 years' time, 3 years' time? So we aren't dealing, you know, if we don't start taking these decisions now, and I appreciate they're hard decisions, then we are simply not going to be able to deal with the increasing pressures that we have here for housing. And if we can't house people, then it's going to put a constraint on every single other aspect of West Northants life, including employment, because employers won't come here if they know that you haven't got the workforce and you haven't got the housing for them and you haven't got all the other things that are needed. The other thing is that there's a lot of talk about sustainability, but it's not sustainable to have all your social housing and other housing growth in the middle of towns and Heimers and so on, and then have people driving to and fro in often clapped out cars to get to where their jobs are. And the reality is that's what's happening now. People from my ward have to drive out to employment areas on the outside of town every day, to and fro, to and fro. That is not sustainable. And this committee has actually approved employment sites out in this place, and we've improved employment sites that provide exactly the type of employment which people who would live in this type of housing need. It includes people on modest incomes. I'm sure some people are on high incomes as well, but everything about this site says that this is where we need it. Now, I share the concerns about infrastructure. I particularly share the concerns about infrastructure on education, and particularly on secondary education, because it is, we agree it now, and then there's discussions and discussions, and then sometimes, you know, things just don't quite work out, like in Dallington Grange, where the government withdrew the funding for the free school, and there's now a housing site, and there's got to start to be new discussions about how to provide that. And meantime, children roundabout are being shipped off to schools all over the place because there's not the provision where it's needed. So I think I do take particularly seriously the concerns around infrastructure on employment, and I would hope that in the discussions moving forward, that is a very active part of the considerations, and perhaps also this committee might want to find a way, I don't know the form of words that can express that we want closer scrutiny of that. I also, of course, regret the loss of open space, you know, because we've seen that happening all over West Northamptonshire. We've lost some beautiful countryside. It's happened around where I live. It's really unfortunate. However, what I come back to is that this is an application which has got a recommendation to approve from the officers, and it also meets one of the biggest challenges that we face in West Northants. Now, these decisions are incredibly difficult to take. Of course they are, and they're very emotive as well. I completely understand all of that, and they're fraught with all kinds of concerns because, you know, it's an overall thing and you never quite know where this path is going to take you, but you know, the one thing it will do is it will deliver some much needed houses in an area where people work. I mean, people here, because I've known people working in these warehouses. People could work from some of these, they could walk from some of these areas to their workplaces, which solves some of the issues about those awful shifts people have to work. And I think that if we can't grasp the nettle of making a decision, a difficult decision like this, we are not going to meet the serious challenges that we face around housing and around sustainable development. So with no great expectation of success, but I am going to move this because I do actually think it's a way which we have to go if we're going to meet the challenges that our communities face. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keeble. So we have a proposal to accept the officer's recommendation in full. Do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Cartwright.
Thank you, Chair. I am aware there have been a great many heartfelt speeches today around this area, bearing in mind that the Fox Hills Country Park is going to be maintained and enhanced. I concur with a lot of what's been said, and I will second the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cartwright. Before we move on to the vote, is there anything else the committee wishes to add? Councillor Fairman.
Thank you, Chair. Before we go on to the vote, and I'd just like to ask, in this application, the roundabout for Wooddale Road, London Road, has been deferred onto the actual application when you read it. This should have been done from a previous development. That's a prerequisite before. Can we have some guarantees that will be done? Because I think it's only fair for residents.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not 100% familiar with it, and colleagues from Highways will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think with that particular roundabout, there are some works of improvement to the Wooddale Road roundabout, which are to be delivered by the Collingtree, it is called Collingtree, isn't it? Collingtree SUE development. And I believe that's still in process to be delivered at some point. And then the works, the improvements that are proposed as part of this as supplementary to that. So it's not as though this is replacing the requirement on another developer. They're meant to sort of go hand in glove and be delivered, but that would be secured through the Section 278 agreements. And obviously the staging and phasing of those developments, the works to that roundabout as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I hear the proposal on the table and I understand it's been seconded. I just wanted to make my position clear. I can't support the proposition as it is. I hear all of the arguments about housing, the 5-year land supply, and all of those needs coming together. But for me, the strongest argument why I can't support this is it isn't plan-led. We have a live South Northants plan. We still have a joint core strategy. We do not yet have a combined plan. There are so many areas of policy where I believe it contradicts. In the joint core strategy objectives 5, 8, 10, SS1, SS2, in the Part 2 local plan, there are plenty of the LH policies. So I can't support the proposition. I just wanted to make my position clear. I accept the arguments on the table from those that do. But for me, we are going against a plan-led approach to development. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. I just want to comment that I take Councillor Harris's points on board, but there isn't just the South Northamptonshire local plan and the joint strategy anymore. We've got as far as a Reg 18 of our emerging local plan. So it does have weight, and it might be limited weight, but you're duty bound. Well, you can give consideration to that Reg 18 plan and what was put before you within that Reg 18 plan, because it's been consulted upon and it's a document before the committee. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, can I just clarify that's up to us to determine what weight we put on it?
Completely. It's
Thank you.
just through you, Chair. I'm reading paragraph 49 of the MPPF, which says the stage of a development, of preparation of an emerging plan. The more advanced the preparation, the greater the weight to be given. So as I said, because it's only at Reg 18, it does have limited weight, but I just want to remind everybody that the MPPF talks about weight being given to emerging plans. Thank you.
I'll allow one more representation and then we'll move on to the votes. Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at MPPF paragraph 49, we should actually be giving weight to the local plan because it's emerging. So, you know, we are well advanced on this. So actually to say that we should be giving weight to this application in the way you're putting it is, I do not agree with you at all. Because this actually, by taking that position, it actually undermines the local plan. You know, we've got a very clear track forward, and this could play out really interestingly when it goes to Reg 19, and it goes before the planning inspectorate for them to look at it. So we're saying one thing, and then what we're saying tonight or this afternoon is very different. So I don't agree, and I'm absolutely on side with Councillor Harris on this. So I won't be supporting this application.
Through you, Chair. I'm just saying that because we are at Reg 19 stage of an emerging local plan, you have to give consideration to it. Thank you.
But this undermines, by doing that, it undermines our position.
How much weight is given is completely up to you as a committee,
Yeah,
Councillor Smith.
Yeah.
Is the point. You know, it's
That's the
there,
point
it
I'm
just
making.
needs to be given weight, but the amount is up to you. If you don't think it deserves much, then that's your personal choice. If you think it deserves more, then that is up to you as a committee, is the point that's being made. We will move on to the vote. Councillor Keeble has proposed that the officer's recommendations are accepted in full. All those voting in for it, please. Against? Abstain? Thank you. So Councillor Keeble's proposal to accept the officer's recommendation in full has not passed. 6 people have voted against it, which means we will need another proposal, please.
Propose to reject it. Yeah, I'm rejecting this on, it's not in the local plan. The housing supply, I will go with the South Northants number, which is 10 years. It's agricultural land. It's encroaching on the village of Quinton. I'm not convinced that healthcare facilities are adequate in the area as it is now, never mind when if this development took place. I reject the idea.
Seconder?
Yeah, if I might, if you're happy for me to add some additional policies, I'll wait.
Can I also just advise, I understand the issues of principle here and plan-led system outside the established local plan framework, and we haven't progressed the Reg 18 plan to a stage that is firmed up. I can understand that position. I think if you throw in that health angle, you're going to need someone from the NHS to defend that position, because the NHS have clearly set out what they require. And so my advice would be, as a general rule, if you're going to refuse this application, do it on a matter of principle, on high, sort of high level policies on the green space. But I think if you throw in that health angle, all of a sudden you've got a bit more difficult argument to make. So I would probably just temper.
Okay, I'll withdraw that then.
Okay, so we've had a recommendation removed. Would someone else like to make a proposal?
So are you still?
Sorry, I was removing the healthcare recommendation. That's all.
Okay,
The
so
rest
can you
of the
just
proposal
clarify,
stands. Yeah.
just clarify your position then, councillor?
Yeah, so on the agricultural land, the fact it's not in the local plan, and I'm going on the South Northamptonshire housing supply, which is over 10 years, and encroachment onto the village of Quinton.
Seconder of this proposal?
I think, Chair, if you look at the 2020 decision notice.
So in terms of kind of the principle that the 2020 decision notice referred to the site being outside the village confines of Grange Park in the open countryside, where large-scale development on unallocated sites generally is not considered appropriate. And then it refers to the policies that it was contrary to. So that gives a thread of if you're saying that you have an in principle concern about the approving this site. But
I'm happy to second it, but I think there are some specific policies that it contravenes. So I've mentioned some of the objectives. I know that's not policies, but some of the objectives in the joint core strategy. But SS1, SS2, S10, BM5, R1, these are actually referred to by the officer in the report, potentially on balance. I also think there are some concerns about paragraphs 82 and 83 of the NPPF, which specifically talks about rural areas and making sure that housing needs are reflected to local areas. And it also suggests that they should be located where it will enhance and maintain the vitality of rural communities. So I think there are two areas there where it contravenes NPPF also, from my perspective.
it's still. Yeah, but it's along the policy.
I'm sorry, there's no questions from the board. No, I'm sorry, there's no questions from
No, I'm trying to get to SS1. Yeah, but it's which.
Would it be beneficial to go downstairs?
Yeah, the policies that we put.
Okay, so SS1's about settlement hierarchy.
SS2 is that.
And SS4, like it. The one that you said.
S4 in joint core strategy, what do you mean?
Yeah, the one that you were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah, the thing is, you could maybe put an angle on it.
Although you didn't mention it.
No.
So SS2 we're talking about.
Hey,
They haven't mentioned coalescence, have they? But
well, we've put encroaching on Quinton.
okay. I don't think there's anything else in there.
Just so we're clear, public, we're just working out the refusal wording, so we'll just bear with us for 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, I think that's the main part of that, isn't it? Yeah, that first bit.
Yeah, this is 2A.
Yeah. What else was he talking about? S10.
S10 is sustainable development, isn't it?
So how are we angling that? High standards of sustainable design, what we're talking about though.
Okay, right. Natural and bioenvironment.
They're not saying that.
Isn't he saying that it harms the countryside by virtue of being in the countryside? Yeah.
So we could use S10 I.
Green infrastructure networks. Choose fragmentation of habitat. No, there's not.
No.
We've got enough.
Let me just clarify.
Okay.
I'll just come back. Yeah. Sorry, through you, Chair. So if I just, apologies for the delay because policy SS2 is quite a lengthy policy, so we need to be very clear in our refusal reason which elements we'll be referring to. Can you hear me now? Okay. So policy SS1 is talking about settlement hierarchy. So I think what's being conveyed this isn't an allocated site, it's a rural area, so it sits low, it's outside settlement boundaries. Policy SS2 is referring to general development design principles, and the key part of that is about maintaining the individual identity of towns and villages, and that talks about maintaining talks about the issue of resulting in coalescence. So that is the element of policy SS2 that we would look to focus on. And then in terms of the joint core strategy, Councillor Harris mentioned policy S10. We'd be looking, it's about protecting and conserving the natural and built environment. So that is part, that's policy S10I. Yeah, we don't, yeah. And also we would be, in the absence of a signed 106, we would need to add that to the refusal.
Councillor Pipes, are you happy with those amendments?
Yes, it covers what I said. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a proposal. It has been clarified. It has been seconded. We'll move on to the vote. All those in favour of Councillor Pipes' proposal? Against? Abstentions? Okay, so Councillor Pipes' proposal to reject the officer's recommendations has been carried. Thank you.
Could we take a
Okay, I'll give you a 5-10 minute break, committee, just so we can all We'll restart in 2 minutes, committee, unless we're ready before that. We're ready. Thank you, committee. We're ready to restart. Agenda item 6 has, as notified at the beginning of the meeting, this has been withdrawn, so we move straight on to agenda item 7, WNC/26/00004/WAS-FUL, Cottage Farm, Unit 11, Hartwell Road. I'll now hand over to Case Officer Claire Spokes to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. Okay. So the application's for a proposed change of use for an existing industrial building to be used as a waste transfer and treatment facility. The application's retrospective. So the site's located on Hartwell Road between the villages of Road and Hartwell. It's co-located on a commercial site, as you can see from the aerial photo here. So this building gained planning permission in 2013. So we're not looking at that in terms of the building. We're looking at as a change of use for waste, the waste facility. The closest residential properties are circled in yellow, with this one being approximately 250 metres from the site. And this one down here is a bed and breakfast with cattery as well, but with residential. All the other buildings are commercial. This is just a site layout plan just to show that the majority of the waste will be stored within the building. There is some storage outside for hardcore soils and green waste. Down at the bottom here next to the access is the site office and a weighbridge. And then there's some empty skip storage just in the front of the building. I won't go on to that one just yet. Oh, I've gone too far. Can I go back? Okay. So the site is proposed to accept 15,000 tonnes of commercial, industrial and domestic waste, predominantly from household builder skips and site clearancing. The waste comes onto the site, is deposited into the reception building. So the majority of the works are carried out inside the building. And then the wastes are separated and bulked before they go on for further processing. Majority goes for further recycling, and a very small amount goes to disposal, that anything that can't be recycled. The proposed vehicle movements for the site are 60 HGVs a day, which is 30 in, 30 out, which is an average of 3 in, 3 out per hour. The site is a reasonably small site, and they don't take articulated lorries, so all the vehicles are reasonable size. We've had 4 neighbour objections raising issues of noise, dust, odour, litter and highway safety. The Environmental Protection Officer has provided comments and confirmed that there's been no complaints since this site has been operational. So it has been operational for over 2 years. It has got an environmental permit, which has the regime of the Environment Agency covers a lot of the pollution controls. So there are management plans for litter, noise and dust that they already have in place underneath the environmental permit. In addition to the 4 neighbour objections, the parish don't object in principle, but they do support the local concerns relating to the highway concerns of the locals. The operator does have an informal agreement with the primary school not to go past the school during school drop-off and pick-up times. The Highways Authority have no issue with the operations as they are, but have asked that a condition is imposed to formalise that agreement with the primary school. The Minerals and Waste Local Plan has a requirement for limiting where the waste sources come from. So on this one, the applicant has proposed a 30-mile radius for the waste to come in, so that we're not taking waste from kind of Scotland or wherever they decide to take it from. So that would restrict waste inputs from within that area. Everything that goes through the site goes through the weighbridge. Everything's recorded in terms of the amount of waste and source of waste, so we can monitor that. There's just a few photos. There was an improved access to the site approved in 2022, which was implemented just after the current operator occupied the site, so that they now have straight access onto Hartwell Road, Lane, sorry. And then there's just a couple of photos of the site from both directions. I think that's it, if you've got any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from committee? Councillor Harris?
Yeah, thank you. It was useful to see the site and see it in operation on the site visit. Could you clarify, have they been running at that capacity since they opened, or is the capacity yet to build up to full capacity? So when you're talking about 60 HGVs, roughly 3 an hour, is that what they're delivering and have been doing for some time, do you know?
I believe that's at peak. What they've told me is that the summer months there is a higher input, so that is a maximum, but it fluctuates throughout the year. So they're obviously just wanting a bit of leeway so that they can operate within the restrictions when it is.
Thanks. And second question is, you talked about and they talked about on the site the informal arrangement they have with the school. In your view, does that need formalising in any way, and is it possible to? So in your view, is it possible to formalise that, and should we consider formalising that to make sure that they stick to the informal arrangement, if you like, in terms of not driving past the school at pick up and drop off?
Yeah, it's been included as a recommended condition within the report. So that does give us kind of a formal channel that if that is breached, then we've got a way to deal with it.
Councillor Pipes?
In the summer months, when it gets very hot and very dusty, is there anything we can do to mitigate insist on having a sprinkler system or something to zap the roads, and can we enforce that?
As I said, the Environment Agency covers a lot of those issues, and there is the Environmental Protection Officer did confirm that there is a dust management plan that is required by the environmental permit. So there is one in place so that if there's issues with dust, the Environment Agency can enforce and take action and make sure that there'll be mitigation in there as well, so that if there is any instances, the operator will will instigate that. They won't want complaints, so that that'll be already in place.
Any other questions, please? Okay, as we have no public representation, move the committee to debate this application, please. Anyone want to start? Councillor Cartwright.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Yeah, again, the site visit was extremely useful. They've been operating for 2 years. There haven't been any complaints. So this dirt, dust issue, whatever, doesn't seem to have caused any issues. I recall they unload most of the stuff inside their warehouse anyway. And there's no statutory objections. So unless anyone can convince me otherwise, I would suggest we vote to accept the officer's recommendations.
Is that a formal proposal? Councillor, okay, do we have a seconder? Before we move on to the vote, is there any other representations the committee wish to make? Okay, so Councillor Cartwright has proposed to accept recommendations in full. It has been seconded. We'll move on to the vote. All those for? Okay, that's 8-4, 1 abstention, which means Councillor Cartwright's proposal to accept has carried, which then leads on to item 8, urgent business. There are no items of urgent business, and therefore now close the meeting at 17:11. Thank you, committee. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.